we welcome Riccardo Manzotti, a colleague here in the university, is well known, full professor of theoretical philosophy. Today, the title of his talk is Mind-Object Identity and Ontophenomenology for a Sustainable and Opportunistic Environmental Ethic.
So I will try to present here a connection between ontology, phenomenology, and let's say a kind of an environmental ethics that may provide a rational solution to the problem of sustainability of the environment, which is, as it always happened with me, a little bit orthogonal to accepted viewpoints. As you can see, I start from a rather controversial claim or idea that being selfish is the rational thing to do. What do I mean by that? I mean that apart from Kant's categorical imperative and other positions that are definitely suggestive of a more cooperative and altruistic zeitgeist, the fact is that there aren't many good reasons not to be selfish, because after all, the being that we are is ourself, and the fact is that we don't have any other option but being the self that we are. And so why should we care about other selves if in all of the history of the universe, in all of the ontology of reality, we are just one thing. We're just the thing that we are, that we call with familiarity and with affection ourself. So why should I not care about my own self? After all, my own self is in everything that is taking place right now in the world, the only thing that it is just one and the same with me. That's the point of the word self. Yes, you may say, yeah, but I love other people, I love the world, and if I am Mr. Nice Guy, maybe other people would love me too. But that's, once again, an opportunistic view, because I am, let's say, kind and nice with other people because I hope that they will be nice and kind with me. Or I am, let's say, worried about climate change and environment because I don't want to live in a world that is totally destroyed. So there seems to be that from a rational perspective, in many ways, I think I won't stretch this point too much. The most rational thing to do is being selfish. But here is the key. The word selfish. What is the self? What is the thing that I am? And here I believe that many traditional notions of the self are not ethically neutral, because once they are combined with the first claim, namely that being selfish is the only rational thing to do, something that maybe we don't say it very loud, because it's not very convenient to say that very loud, but something that lurks in the background of our own existence. After all, do we really care for the other people? Do we really care for the world? Yes, we live in a society, and because we live in a society, we are bombarded every day with the notion that we have to care for the other people. Because that's the point of a society, to convince everybody to live together, because otherwise society would fall apart. So we've been educated to believe that maybe we should care for other people, but do we? And the point is that maybe, rationally speaking, we are not 100% convinced that we have good reason not to care about ourselves. And if we look at what people do, we find out that many people, once they can do whatever they want, they are actually very selfish. So it is easy to be altruistic when you're poor, when you need other people, and so forth. But what about if you were really in a position of power? And we see, it's an empirical fact, that many people in a position of power are quite selfish. So probably because in the back of our mind, many people think that after all it is true that being selfish is the only rational thing to do. But, as I said, what is the self? What is the thing that it is one with ourselves? And I believe, as I said, that many views are based on the idea that the self is separate from the world. So, what we usually call being selfish or being greedy is not just being selfish. It's two things together. One thing is being selfish, and the other one is to believe that the thing that we call our self is divided from the world, or is divided from other people. That's why those two notions combined lead to what we call a rather greedy attitude towards the world. Let's see if okay. So my point, my students will be very familiar with my antipathy and aversion for the Vitruvian man. So the notion that man is somehow a principle, ontologically speaking, separate from the world, separate from reality, that it is something different, either at the center or at least different and separate from, there's a gap between us and the world. There's a gap between our imagination and the world. There's a gap between our phenomenology, I'm getting to the mouthful, which is the title I gave to this presentation, and the ontology, the physical ontology of the world. Such a notion suggests to many people, not only philosophers, but also scientists today, that the world we live in is just a mental construction, that our self is just inside our mind, and occasionally our mind is also our head. So many people have this idea of the portable Plato's cave where they live inside the head. And if that were true, after all, why should we care about what is taking place outside the wall of our self, outside the walls of our head? After all, if they told us that we can live in a life support system that is going to take care of our body, and then we are going to have a beautiful virtual life for 100 years, and along those 100 years we will be beautiful, forever young, as in, for example, Black Mirror, San Juniper's episode, why not? We would, because in such a notion, we would be inside our virtual world, and ourself would be inside our virtual world. But many people rejected this notion that, by the way, today is very popular. For example, Zuckerberg, that I like to quote, put a lot of money and political power into changing his Facebook company into a big gamble, the metaverse company. So many people have rejected this Cartesian view. So not everybody will agree with this notion that we are just a virtual world inside the head. So many people have taken into consideration today, embodied cognitivists and activists, many different streams today are supporting the idea that we are our body. But our body is just has exactly the same problem. If we believe to be our body, if we believe that our self is constituted by the states of our body, then once again we have a separation, no longer a metaphysical separation, but once again a separation. That's enough to make the claim I started from very bad for the environment and for society, because then we would care only about our body, and we could take care of our body in an enclosed space. Why should we care for the rest of the world? So I believe that the first step is to give one more blow to our narcissism and to say we're not special. We're not a self against the world. We're not a self surrounded by objects. We are not metaphysically different from reality. The ontology is flat. What does it mean the ontology is flat? That there is just one ontological layer. And this ontological layer is populated by objects. So the first step that I want to make here is to insist that we are not different from the world. We are not a magic place where images and where the phenomenology of the world finally enlighten the dark ontology of the world, the darkness of reality. You know, many people have this idea that before human being, ontologically speaking, reality was dark. And then subjects appeared, and it was light. Phenomenal light, phenomenological light, depending on your preferred terminology. And then the world finally appeared, as though it has been waiting for us to appear. I think we have to get out of this Garden of Eden, where we've been living, believing that world was different, that human subject was different, was in an enclosed space. We have to get out, and to get out of this metaphysical Garden of Eden, we must accept that we are just objects among objects. And we have to look for ourselves elsewhere. Where? In the world. And we have to take into consideration the possibility that we are one and the same with the world. I like very much this frame taken from a movie called The Artist, where there is this artist, an actor that has fallen into disgrace, and that is seeking for herself, and is finding herself in a reflection. Is finding herself in a combination of a suit in a shop and a reflected image. And so he's finding himself out of his body, out of his head. Where is this artist? Is he in his body? Is he an image in his mind? Is he a phenomenological layer superimposed to reality? No, this guy is out of his body and is one with the world as it takes place. So this guy doesn't have a privileged access to himself, because the idea is that whatever we are made of is in the world, in a world that is neither internal nor external, a world that is just ontologically real, ontologically taking place. We have these two metaphors that have had a very an impact that cannot be underestimated. The two notions of interiority and exteriority. The notion of inner world and the notion of the external physical world. The notion of the inner reality, or the inside and the outside. My students know that I like to quote very much a cartoon by Pixar that has this problem in its very title, Inside Out. But I often mention with my student that this notion of inside out, the idea that there is an inner reality and an outer reality, may be a pseudo problem. Maybe a pseudo problem because this idea is based on a conflict, on a separation, once again. In contrast to this idea, in reality, everything is neither inside nor outside. Inside of what, after all? It is just what it is. Of course, there are objects that may be container, but that's an unproblematic notion of being inside. The metaphysical notion of being inside is totally different. So one thing is to say that I am made of the world. Another thing is to say that the world is inside me. Inside what? You know, this notion of being inside is related with the notion of the Garden of the Eden, which is related to the notion of the cave, which is related with the notion of the village, of the fence, of a separation between us and the world, which is the notion of the town, of the city. When the hunter-gatherer society became rather society of agriculture, and they started to live into towns and city, all of a sudden they created a separation between the world of man and the world of nature. Nature was created when they built the first fence that divided the village from the world. And as they built the fence, they went on, then they built the caves, houses, and then they kind of reified this notion of the fence and the separation into the notion of the mind. Well, clothes too are a way to separate us from the external reality. And we feel that because we belong to a society, we need to wear clothes. Why? Because we need not to go around naked, and we need to keep a separation between us and the other people, between us and the world. So society now is created with a separation, with the walls of the town, the walls of the city. Today, not many cities have walls any longer, but in the past, the first thing that you did whenever you wanted to build a city was to build a wall. That was the first thing. When Romulus and Remus decided to build Rome, first thing was, let's build the walls, and then let's start to put us inside, to make a separation. Rather than that, my view suggests that we are one and the same with the world, and we may find out that the world is not as naive as the naive physically suggested it to be. And so here I would present you very quickly with 3 examples that should convey to you this insight that the external world is one with ourselves. And the first example is the rainbow. Why I like so much the rainbow. First of all, because it's a beautiful phenomenon in the sky, and nobody can ask for anything more beautiful in nature. You know, it's perfect, ideal, round-shaped. You cannot ask for anything better than that. But the point of the rainbow is that the rainbow, although it is outside our body, is quintessentially, it is metaphysically, physically dependent on the observer. So every observer sees a different rainbow. Why? Because, and that's why the observer is always at the center of the rainbow. Because the rainbow that we see is just one out of the many possible ones that a cloud may produce. So actually, when we take a picture of a rainbow, we take a picture of a rainbow, of that particular rainbow which exists relative to that camera. We're not taking a picture of the rainbow that we see, we are taking a picture of the rainbow that the camera sees. Usually they're not that different, so usually we go back home and we have the impression that we took exactly a picture of the rainbow that we saw. But the fact is that the camera is never exactly where our eye is. It's just a little bit farther away, or just a bit to the left, or just a bit to the right, or whatever. And so it is always one different rainbow. And if there were many beholders watching the cloud, each of them would see a slightly different rainbow. A proof of that is the fact that if we move, if we shift, the rainbow will move with us. Because every time that we change our position in space, we're going to select another rainbow. So the rainbow that we see is at the same time outside us and relative to us. And nobody can see the rainbow of someone else. So if Renato and I were here, we would see, and there was a cloud there rather than the students, we would see 2 slightly different rainbows. And there would be no way for us to see exactly the same rainbow. So the rainbow is an example of a relative object. This is another illusion which is a nice example of relative object. Here you may have the impression that the colored blobs are circling around and rotating around the center of the image. But at the same time, in fact, what it is happening is that each of those blobs is moving back and forth along one of the rays. So these blobs are not rotating at all. They're moving up and down, or right and left, or moving, following. If you take your gaze fixed on one of the blobs, you would see that it moves back and forth along its rays, which is quite surprising. And you can just change your point of view, and everything would just look different, but it would be just the same. Another example that I like to make is a very familiar example that all of you are familiar with, which is your phone screen. So suppose that what you see on your back is the screen of your phone, and that you are just watching a white screen. You just put a white background on your phone. So you may say that is white. You just put on a white background. But the fact is that if you get closer and closer, let's see, to your screen, you would see that your screen is made by a grid of red, green, and blue dots. And the closer you get to that screen, and the bigger the dots will become. So the question is the screen made by a white surface, or is it made by a grid of red, green, and blue dots? And the reply is that it is both. It is white relative to a human eye, let's say at 30 centimeters of distance or more, or it is a red, blue, and green grid relative to a lens or to a different eye or to someone very close to that. So it is both. And this is another example that I like very much from an artist, a Swiss artist, that shows how the power of recombination is able to create object out of the external reality. So you just start with familiar object, and then you get Salvador Dali's face. So all these things put together suggest us a very an alternative solution. An alternative solution. The solution that I want to put forward is that what we always consider to be our inner world is actually the external relative world. Here all adjectives plays a key role. So let me get back to this key notion. What we have considered to be the inner world, we believe it to be somehow inside us, the world of our imagination, the world of our inner images and mental images. The suggestion is that it might have always been outside. It has always been the external world recombined in many different ways relative to our body. Just like the rainbow keeps changing as long as we change our position in space. Just like our screen may be different relative to the distance at which we watch the screen. Just like the rotating blobs and spirals keep changing if we change our point of view. The idea is that this example that I just presented to you, the rainbow, the screen, the spirals, and whatever, and I could go on forever. I have an unlimited repertoire of such examples, shows us that the world is not made of object with an absolute existence. The world is made of objects that have a relative existence. Relative to what? Relative to our body. And this is the key, this is fundamental, because because we have historically developed the notion of a mental world to explain how could it be possible that the world is one and we all have a different experience of the world. So, the world is one, and Renato sees the world in a certain way. I see the world in a different way. To explain that, the traditional explanation was that the world had to be one, always the same for everybody. But that I had an inner appearance of the world, and Renato had his own inner experience of the world. And so the difference between our own experiences had been explained in terms of subjective realities. Subjective inner world. Why our experiences were different? Because they were inside us. So I could have anything I wanted, and Renato could have anything he wanted. But what if the explanation is a different one? Namely that the world is by its own very nature relative. And so it might well be that the world is in one way for me and in another way for Renato, because we have different bodies, we are in different places in space, we have a different point in our life. So we are two different reference frames. I borrow the expression reference frame from physics because in physics the idea that by changing the reference frame you change the physical properties of the world, namely velocity, it has been accepted at least as of Galileo. As of Galileo, we no longer believe that the velocity is the same for everyone. We believe that velocity is intrinsically relative. So when we get a ticket, from the police because we were going too fast. The police has to say that that velocity has been measured relative to an instrument that has been placed in a certain place at a certain time at a certain moment. That may seem an irrelevant detail when you have to pay 500 euro for a speed ticket, as I did a week ago, 559 euro, but it is not a minor factor. Actually, that tells us that the velocity were relative to a given instrument, which was relative to the ground, which was relative to the street, and so forth. So the idea is that the world may be slightly more complex than we expected it to be. But by being more complex, the world, it might be that our mind might be simpler. So there's a trade-off. We can either have a world that is super simple, but to explain that, we have to add a complex mind with a phenomenological layer that is let's say, that carry the burden of the complexity of the different experiences, or we can have a super simple mind, actually no mind at all, and a slightly more complex world. A world where everything is different relative to everything else. Did this notion lead to the collapse of physics? Are we no longer able to measure the speed of bodies in space or in the street or whatever? Not at all. It was just a conceptual change. A conceptual change that made it possible to see reality in a slightly different way, and that led afterward to further revolution in physics, such as Newton, such as other people who took into consideration reality in a relative way. It would be very interesting to study the story of the word relative and relativity in physics, but we won't do it here. But it is, let me just mention that a great mathematician like Hermann Minkowski, who is the guy who basically wrote the mathematics behind general relativity before dying of appendix, of an inflamed appendix, wrote that the biggest misnomer in the history of physics was relativity for general relativity. So that was a mistake. So that would be very interesting, but we won't speak about that, but I'd just like to mention. So that's why I try to convey this change of paradigm with this picture at my back. In this picture, if you pay attention, there are no heads. Those men and women, I've been careful to put as many men and women, they have no head. They're headless bodies. And why they're headless? And in place of their head, there is a world. And that world is shared by everybody. And that's a fact, that we share our world. We share our experiences. You know, there are many things that have, in my belief, they are a pseudo problem due to the fact that we put the man or the human being, the subject, at the center of reality. And then we had to explain how was it possible that reality was reproduced inside such a center, was brought it into the center. I am suggesting I'm trying to upturn the picture upside down or inside out. So here we have inside the world, the real world. And everybody is sharing that world. So right now we are all sharing something. So for example, right now we are all seeing this box of water, this water box. This is in some sense inside each of us. This is at this very moment constituting each of us. So basically here, and then I'm moving towards the ethical consequence of such a view, which is the main topic of my talk. But in order to make the ethical consequence, I needed just to give you a very rough idea of this ontological hypothesis. The idea is that we are not separate from the world. We are not an inner world. My point is that if we believe in an inner world, the rational thing to do is to not care about the external world, unless the external world has an impact on the inner world. But if I can build a fence, a wall, if I can build some defense mechanism between myself and the world, why should I care about the external world? But here I'm suggesting something that is very radical, namely that if we have a ontophenomenology, namely an ontology where we are one, where our phenomenon, where our experience, our appearance is one with the physical reality, as it is in this picture in my back, if we can really conceive of ourselves as being one with the world, then being selfish means to care for the world. Because the self is the world. That is the paradoxical conclusion that I derive from the two consequences I started from. If you remember, the first one was being selfish is the rational thing to do. And I don't claim that. I think that after all, is the good thing to do. But the second one is, yes, but what is the self? If we take the self to be an inner world, then the consequence of these two claims is a greedy attitude, a very selfish attitude in the classical sense, opportunistic attitude against the world. We don't care about sustainability, about the environment, about all of that. But if we reject the second claim, namely that we are inside our body, our mind, our whatever, our fence, our village, then the first claim no longer leads to the notion, no longer leads to, such an opportunistic worldview. It suggests that caring for the world means to care for ourselves, because the self is the world. So I'm just recapping everything that I said so far. So the idea is that a model of the mind has, as you can imagine, that's nothing new, has radical consequence on our ethical view of reality. Depending on what we believe we are, we will draw different conclusions about what it is the rational thing to do. So if we are the other one, being altruist is the most selfish thing to do. It is no longer, caring for other people is no longer an act of unjustified and irrational generosity. The point is that generosity, once you accept to be separate from the external world, is not rational. In this view, generosity becomes rational. And so, in order to do that, of course, you need a critical notion of the object, the one that I try to explain to you, the idea that everything is relative to everything else. And then you may also advance an idea, a definition. This is just a work in progress. So this is just a tentative definition of good. Good is always relative, but not subjective. Being relative means that good, just like speed, I like example from physics. Good is just whatever it is constitutive of your own existence. And depending on what you are, good is different. So clearly what is good for us is different from what is good for COVID. Clearly we have to take into consideration that good cannot be the same for everybody else. But in this view we may provide a definition of good that is not subjective. What was the problem, and then I'm really going towards the end, what was the problem of a subjectivistic definition of good and evil? The problem is that they are arbitrary. And why they're arbitrary? Because subjective means to be relative to a subject. And by definition, the subject is defined as something which is outside of the world of objects. Otherwise, we would not use a different word. But by saying that, we say that if we believe that good and evil are subjective, we also mean that good and evil are not real. And there are plenty of consequences that this is a very weak ethics. It will lead to a very weak ontology with all Dostoevsky's problem, with all subjectivistic view. The idea here is to propose that the world is intrinsically relative, and that good and evil may be defined inside the structure of the world. But the trick is to be one with the world. When we sit in a grass, that's me, the idea is that we may be one with world, without the article. I didn't say one with the world, because the world is one thing. It suggests that it has an absolute existence. I'm using world as a not countable noun, so that's a liberty that I take, and which is the stuff we're made of. So the idea is that there's no separation between us and the world, and when we accept that, we may consider an environmentally friendly form of selfishness that would lead us to care about reality and to care about sustainability. But in order to do that, we must accept that ontology and phenomenology are one and the same. That's it. Sorry for the video.
Thank you. Thank you, Riccardo, for this challenging talk. And I'm sure there will be some questions about that. Is there any question?
Objection.
Yes, Professor Totaro. Oh, sì. Certo. Su di là.
So, Riccardo, I am afraid, or I think simply, that you call relativism something that is relationism. So, everybody is seeing something that is rainbow from many perspectives. And so I arrived to agree with you. But in any case, these many perspectives are in relationship with a rainbow and not with a dog or with an horse, or with a fish. No. The multiple perspectives are a relationship of intentionality of the same. So the rainbow is the same, that is seen from multiple perspectives, and this is relationism and not relativity, absolutely relativity, because there is something that is the same thing. So the rainbow isn't a horse or a fish or a dog, etc., etc. Second point to highlight. When I see something that is a rainbow, so of course there isn't a separation between me and the rainbow, but in the same time, I have to recognize that I am not a rainbow, and vice versa. I think that rainbow isn't me. So there is the idea of the difference, and not of a full identity between me and the rainbow. So I think that your reflection is very important to take out, to put out separation. But if you arrive to put an undistinction, so I think that you make a passage that isn't authorized by your reflection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's always very dangerous to make two questions because then one can choose to which one reply. No, it's just a joke. But let me start from the last point that you articulated very clearly. When we watch the rainbow, we are not the rainbow because there is the rainbow and then there is the observer of the rainbow. Well, actually, I don't think that when we watch the rainbow, we are anything but the rainbow. Because the difference is not between us and the rainbow, between the self and the rainbow. The difference is between the body of the observer and the rainbow. Of course, my body is here and the cloud and the rainbow is there. So there's clearly a separation between the rainbow and my body. But where is the self? What is the self? I mean, the self is not something that it is so obvious that it is where the body is. The self, I mean, that of course is a commonsensical notion that the self has to be where the body of the self is. But is that, has that ever been demonstrated? Has anyone ever found a self inside a body or close to a body or constituted by, has anyone ever found a body at all, actually? No. So the self is something that has to be placed. The localization of the self is the problem that has to be solved. And there's no clear idea about regarding where the self is. That is the very question that we need to answer. Now, if I asked you, when you watch the rainbow, tell me what's inside your experience at this very moment. You would provide me with all the properties of the rainbow rather than with the properties of your body at that very moment. So why should I not be tempted to place the self in the object rather than in the body that is interacting with the object? Of course, the body has a role. I'm not saying that the body is immaterial to you being a rainbow. The body provides the rainbow a possibility to interact with reality in a certain way. In fact, you don't see all possible rainbows. You see only that very rainbow which exists relative to your own very body. But if you have to choose which one of them you are, I suggest you, I'm not pretending to convince you, but I'm asking you to take into consideration whether you might be the rainbow rather than the body that is in front of the rainbow. As to the first question, you're right. There is a sense in which all of the rainbow perspectives are lumped together. But we don't need to assume the existence of an absolute rainbow that is the source of all such relative rainbows. Because we could take that the same rainbow that you so convincingly mentioned might just be a kind of horizon of all of the rainbows, of all the perspectival rainbows, all of the relative rainbow. It is just like a center of gravity of all such rainbows that it is very useful. And in many cases, it makes a lot of sense. For example, if rather than a rainbow we had an apple, there's a sense in which an apple can be eaten only once, because the process that leads to eating an apple is just is destructive. So my point is that that notion of the absolute rainbow that might be seen from many relative perspectives is a construction. So let's say that I'm putting the metaphysical priorities on the perspectival rainbows, and I see the absolute rainbow as a construction out of them, while you prefer to put the metaphysical priority on the same rainbow and dealing with the perspectival rainbows as though they are somehow constituted by. So once again, we have a different point of view about such is. And the two points of view, in a way, are complementary and opposite, too.
Is there any other questions? Yes. Wait for the microphone.
So, if first of all, if you say the self is world and like myself, I can find it in the world, taking off the article, or as you just said. But does that imply that there is one universal self that we all relatively find, but it's one unique self? And if not, what happens when each person's unique self, which is found in the same world that we approach from our relative selves, what happens when each self comes into conflict within that same world?
Correct, correct. Not everything is well and good, of course. There may be conflict. There may be conflict. As I mentioned, what is good relative to in my world, it might not be good relative to someone else's world. That's there's definitely no way to have one good to rule them all, to paraphrase the Lord of the Rings. But on the other hand, I like the idea that interacting together leads us to be made of the same world. So there's a sense in which, although the perspectival rainbows that we see, they're all different, they are somehow lumped together, and they suggest a common horizon. That common horizon is the common horizon into which all our rainbows may take place. So by interacting together, there is the possibility, as in the picture that I put, where there are all the bodies and they're all surrounding a world made of objects, where we share, because we no longer live in a private reality, but we are literally constituted by a public reality. We are one with a public ontology. Here the ontology is totally public. There's nothing private in a metaphysical Cartesian sense. And that's a big advantage from an ethically, environmentally friendly perspective. But of course, there may be conflict. There may be worlds. In this case, there will not be conflicts between subjects. There will be conflicts between worlds. But conflict nonetheless.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's like an idealistic point of view, like Hegel. When you say conflict and other words, it's quite the same or not?
I'm not 100% sure that Hegel was idealistic in 100%, because, you know, once you have just one flat ontology, it's a matter of taste whether to call it idealistic or I would just say that there is just one flat ontology. So in that sense, you know, like Berkeley.
Sorry,
Yes, sorry.
There is a problem with the flat ontology. For example, for Graham Harman,
Yes.
the theorist
Yes.
of flat ontology, there are only objects, but there aren't relationships, because objects are withdrawal. The term is withdrawal, ritratto. There aren't relationships. There is a paradox. Objects are multiplicity, not are one.
Right. Well, yes, exactly. I'm very sympathetic with Harman's object-oriented ontology in many ways. I try to avoid very carefully the problem of relations, the problem of If you pay attention to my presentation, I think I haven't used the word relation once. I always use the word relative existence or relative objects. What is the difference ontologically speaking? The difference is that the relation are, to borrow Whitehead's view, they are extrinsic or external relation. While I think that if a relation are intrinsic or internal to the object themselves, so we don't have really relation, we just have relative objects, which are intrinsically relative, so their existence is intrinsically relative, you no longer need a layer of relation, of external relation to connect them. So my point is that if carefully constructed from an ontological point of view, a flat ontology made of intrinsically relative object may resist to your concern. And another point that okay, I forgot it, but it was related with this notion of...
Only for Hegel.
Yes, no, but let me get back to physics. In physics, we have relative velocity, but we don't have a relation. Velocity is intrinsically relative, and physicists have had no need to add a layer of relation in order to support the ontology of velocity. It is just intrinsically relative. It is just the way it is built from the ground up. In the same way, my point is that maybe all objects are just intrinsically relative. So there aren't relations. Relations have been introduced, let's say, in the transcendental turn with Husserl, with Brentano and the like, when they started to say that consciousness is always consciousness of something. Yes. And that of carried a big burden, a big ontological burden. I'm just saying one final thing very quickly. Take Descartes, for example. In Descartes, there are no relation between the self and his or her ideas. The self is just one with the ideas. There aren't relations. And also, in the view that I criticized at the beginning from neuroscience, the mind-brain identity, there aren't any relation between a brain and its neural activities. They're just one and the same. So I think that with some caution it is possible to find a way to not fall into the trap of an additional layer of relations.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I catch right your proposal, but just a clarification. Seems to me that when you speak about mind-object identity, you emphasize the horizon of the present. But when I perceive something, my experience depends more on the horizon of the absence, what is no longer, what is not yet. Seems to me that this identity is really reduced to the horizon of the present. Let us take, for example, a trauma. When I perceive this identity, where is my personal trauma? Where is my history in this mind-object theory?
Yes. In this view, reality is just one. And it is just one between the self and the object. It is also one in time, because there's no space left for being in relation with the past, because the past is no more. So it is, a way, a kind of presentism. But then you may say, how can we be in relation with the past, with the absence of things? But let me ask you a question. Do you feel the absence of a tentacle? No, you don't. That would be meaningless. Do you feel the absence of your wings on your back? No, you don't, because you never had wings. Do you need the absence of fins? You don't, because you never had fins. Nobody has ever had fins. What we call absences, they are expectations of something that had been present. So my reply to that, which I cannot squeeze it in a reply, but just to give you an idea where I would go, is to revisit all absences in terms of presence of things in the past. And because they're always supported by something that was present in the past, and that the combination of which was possible in the past, and that we feel the absence of it right now. But we feel the absence of it right now has an effect of a presence. So the idea is that it is possible to revisit all negative notions, such as absence and the like, in terms of actual presence that are producing an effect in the presence like now. And of course, this may be questioned, but for example, today we've been talking about, and I don't take it too long, Renato is worth. Today in class we mentioned Shannon. Shannon, at a certain point, provided a beautiful definition of memory. He said that memory is slow communication. Likewise, I say that memory and past is just a stretched present. It's just slow present. So we can revisit everything in terms of actual presence, although combined in different ways. So I don't think that we really need a layer of pure imagination, but you know, that's my bet.
And maybe I have a lot of questions, but the first one directly connected to that of Fleurier. And we have a particular phenomenon that is dream. Normally, dream is considered as an inner phenomenon. And in dreams, for example, I can have the experience of wings, and when I wake up, I feel the absence of wings. So how can you put this particular phenomenon into your theory?
Can you dream of a color that you have never seen before, of a hue, shade? And as far as we know, nobody has ever been able to create a novel content in one dream. Dreams are usually made only of recombinations of our previous experiences. Congenitally blind subjects don't dream of colors. And likewise, if you haven't... so we dream of wings because we've seen pictures of angels. We've been watching X-Men and the like, and Lucifer with his beautiful wings and whatever. And we saw winged animals and the like. Descartes himself, the champion of the autonomy of the thinking substance, of the two layers, of the two metaphysical independent layers, when speaking about dreams that played a fundamental role in developing his notion of the two layers, he claims that in dreams, there's a famous passage from the Philosophical Meditations. In dreams, our mind is like a painter who wants to create mythical or fantastic creatures and is able only to combine together creatures that we've been already familiar with. So it creates a siren putting together a fish and a woman, a centaur putting together a man and a horse. And what does tell us? I think it tells us that dreams are a kind of slow perception, unconstrained by the order in which it presented us in reality. So in dreams we bring actual combination of reality to their own actuality. This is to say, for example, today I see Renato, and then I see someone else, I see Maria. And then tonight I dream the body of Renato with the head of Maria. And how is that possible? Because at that very moment when I am in my bed, these two events are still active. They're still producing an effect. So I perceive them as though when that guy, do you remember the artist, the frame from the movie The Artist? That guy was watching a screen, a window, a glass, and beyond the glass there was a suit, and there was a reflection of his own head. And he saw himself as though he was wearing the suit. For me, that's a perfect analogy with the dream. Dream are recombination, are a perception of the past, which is not really past, in novel combination. And that's why afterward we dreamt of having wings. We feel the absence of them, because for a moment, wings had an actual effect in our dream.
So do you think that dream are something outside something
Yes.
real?
Yes.
Not absolutely not human.
That's a bullet that is hard to swallow, but it is something that it is
Coherently
consistent
with your theory.
with my
yeah.
theory, and I must accept that that is the case. The dreams are a perception of the past. And actually, for many centuries, when people were dreaming, people said that they were stepping into another world. They didn't think they were having a hallucination. That's a relatively recent notion of dreams. In most of the past, people believed that dreams were actually a way to access an alternative world. A world made of pieces of our own world, after all. That for a moment had an opportunity to produce an effect in our world. That's so the dream, in a way, is a gate through which possible worlds are able to act in our world as imagination, after all. I dream of a machine that nobody has ever built, and because of that, the day after, I can build a machine. And that machine has stepped into our world. From where? From a dream world. But my point is that the dream world is actually the actual world in all its infinite different combinations. I know, it sounds very strange at first, but that's our job, to make risky hypotheses.
Challenging, yes. And is there any other question? Yes.
I didn't really understand when you were talking about the self. I can see how the self can be formed by the outer world, but I can understand how the self is not always where the body is. So the self is not created within your own mind.
When you indicated with your hand, right now, when you were speaking, you said, when to your mind, it's not created with your mind. With your left hand, you pointed towards your head.
Yeah, because I think...
Exactly, that's because it is so strong, the notion that we are behind our eyes, that when you think about your mind, you cannot but point to your head. So this is something that we really believe, that we really feel it to be true. Like people felt for centuries that the earth is still. What could be more certain that the earth is still? Come on. But afterward, people started to say, well, and in a sense, it is still. I mean, the earth is still relative to its own reference frame. So when people say the earth is rotating around, that's not totally true, because relative to a reference frame centered to the earth is perfectly still. But right now you pointed to another commonsensical notion, namely that I am here, that's me. You pointed to your body.
Yeah.
And that's something that we feel it very strongly. But it's not something that we know for sure. That is a commonsensical insight. But is it true? What we know is that basically the biggest reason why we point to our body when we point to ourselves is that other people point to our body when they point to ourselves. When I point to Renato, I say, Renato. Where is Renato? He's there. Where is Maria? He's there. Where is Professor Totaro? He's down there at the bottom of the room. And I always point to their body. So you believe other people, that you must be where they are pointing with their fingers, where they want to point at you. And that's because your body is the reference frame relative to which your world exists. But when I see your body, when I see a model, do I really see him or her? Or do I see only his body? And when you speak about your body, don't you feel some resistance to say, I am my body? Do you not rather say, I have a body? So if you have a body, that means that you are not your body. That means that you are separate from your body. But then what are you? The traditional solution was that you were an immaterial entity. But I don't believe in immaterial entities. So there's only another option, in my view. And like Sherlock Holmes was fond of saying, once you have rejected all that is impossible, what is left has to be true. And so my suggestion is that, as strange as it may seem to you, and I'm sure that this seems very strange to you, you may not be behind your eyes. You may be in front of your eyes.
So, like, the world is ourselves,
Yes.
basically.
Yes.
Okay.
The relative
I find
world.
it very hard to comprehend.
I know, it's super hard. It's super hard. But we're not here to do easy things.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for your
But
point.
no, you're very correct in your...
We have a place for our last question. Yes, 2. Wonderful. We use all the time we have.
You see, philosophers are like perfect gases. They inflate to occupy all the available space.
Yeah, it's this is the place for for doing that, to do that.
Thank you for your very interesting lecture, and I would like to comment on what you have talked about lately, because seems to me that in that last part of your comments, you somewhat conflated 2 aspects of embodiment. Yes, because in phenomenology there is a sharp distinction between body as an object, yes, Körper, and body that is a lived through, the lived body. Yes.
Absolutely.
So, of course, if you are talking about body as an object, Körper, in Husserlian terms, of course, this is an object to be seen, to be perceived by the others. But if you are talking about our body as it is lived by us, that is the lived body, of course, I am my body. I have my body as an object, but also I am my body.
Yes.
That is the lived body, yes? Thank you.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. Actually, this is a very critical point that I have addressed in a paper called Enworldment versus Embodiment. And basically, my point is that the body, as nice as it seems to be the living body, it may not be the right target, the right solution, the right candidate. Because as of in all of the phenomenological tradition, the living body is never explained. Why should it be any different from the world? We saw that the notion of living body, for example, in enactivism, is a very problematic notion. They try to explain, if you take, for example, Thompson or other people, they try to explain the living body with life. So they try to support the notion of the mind on top of the notion of a living body. But they don't know why should a living body be any more special than another kind of body. And that notion is somehow postulated that there has to be a living body. I see that as some kind of a priori notion that is added, but it doesn't really explain anything. Of course, if I had a living body, that may provide me with a solution, because the living body is by definition different from the reality. But do I have that latitude to have a living body as different, as opposed to the actual physical world? Can I have that difference? So my point is that rather than considering a living body, I would suggest to consider a living world. The body, there was something good in the notion of a living body. So rather than embodiment, I would consider embodiment, I would rather consider enworldment. The body is not enough. We have to just to enlarge a little bit the scope of what we are talking about. And I think that, but this is a very complicated point, so this would require to me a lot more time to address it properly. I believe that this notion of the living body is suspicious, because it brings together the notion of life with the notion of the mind, and I'm not sure that that's the right way to proceed. So I try to resist to that. So for me, there are just bodies, as in some bodies or any bodies, but just bodies. There are no special living bodies. And of course, this is something that I'm sure you won't agree. You don't agree, but because it goes against a very interesting and in a many way important tradition. But I don't think that that tradition is going anywhere. I cannot hear you if you don't use the mic. Sorry, okay, I'm not Superman.
Okay, so what do you think about the body intentionality? Because the main feature of the lived body is its intentionality. And of course, it is by this very intentionality in a very deep and very essential, significant connection with the world, yes?
Yes.
So in this sense, it is not to be separated, yes? Because it is always, by its intentions, yes, reflected on the body, and also it is trying to perform their projects exactly in this body, in this world. So in this sense, the body of the lived body is, of course, also connected in a very meaningful way with the external world. Yes, it is
yes,
orientational and oriented point in the world. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that my approach, for example, explains away intentionality in terms of identity. Just like in Descartes, there was no need for intentionality. Intentionality becomes a problem after, as I said, there was the phenomenological turn with Brentano, Husserl, and everybody else, as you know, probably much better than I do, that suggested this transcendental self that had the problem of being in communication with the reality, with having some kind of intentionality with reality. And, but if we have identity, we no longer need intentionality. And we no longer need to have a living body that is the bearer of intentionality. Because we no longer have the need to connect the self with the world. Because once the world is the self, basically it is a kind of Cartesianism without a duality. So you were right pointing to Hegel, although Hegel had many other metaphysical machinery in place, but it is in a way closer, for example, to Schelling. And Hegel was influenced by Schelling. So I would rather say that this position is a modern version of the certain insight that Schelling had about the identity between self and nature. So in a way I'm closer to, but of course this is something that it would require a lot more discussion. I mean, that's having to do with the tradition, like the phenomenological tradition, but the basic idea is that we no longer need intentionality.
Hi. My question is, what's about morals in your theory?
What about?
Moral.
Moral.
Because if everything is relative, even the definition of good and evil, I think, do we need a Leviathan, as Hobbes said, to put us together, to put together different point of view? Do we need rules in our life, in our society?
Yeah, I will reply with a joke, which is only half a joke. We don't need the Leviathan, but the Leviathan needs us. So, and the Leviathan, so in a way, yes, what is good relative to society is not necessarily good for the individuals. What is good for my body is not necessarily good for my cells. My cells keep sacrificing themselves all the time for the greater good of my body. So relative to my body, many things are good that are not good for my cells. So, as I said, there are conflicts between worlds. But the point is that relative, let me make you one more example. The asteroid that killed the dinosaur, it hit the Earth with a certain velocity, which was relative, but was real. So it killed all the dinosaurs, but the dinosaurs were not free to say, oh, it's relative, who cares? No, they were annihilated by the asteroids. So relative doesn't mean arbitrary.
Right. I think that we have to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
To Professor Manzotti. Before closing this very hard discussion, I want only to remember you that tomorrow morning we will start at 9 o'clock. We will start with 3 different parallel sessions in different places. You can find all the information here. And before leaving, I want to thank a lot all the technicians that helped us for all the days. Thank you so much, technicians, for all the help you have done, all that you have done for us. So thank you, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Grazie.